And I want to thank my friend from Oklahoma for yielding me the customary time. And let me say about him that he's someone I admire very greatly. But I don't admire this bill. I have to rise to debate the rule for the final bill of the 113th Congress, which is the most closed Congress in history. House majorities over and over again stifled debate, limited the ability of members of this body to participate in the legislative process, and undermined the institution. We have had 83 closed rules this term, the most in history, and this bill follows suit and has been again brought to us under a closed rule, which means that no member will be able to offer an amendment, and the $1.1 trillion spending bill to keep the federal government funded will be rushed through the legislative process because the deadline to keep the government open is 11:59 this evening. By a strange circumstance, I was doing a rule the night last time the government shut down, still on the floor at midnight, and made the announcement that the great government of the United States of America was closed. We don't, obviously, none of us want to see that again, but we do see dysfunction mirrored in the Rules Committee because all of our meetings are now only declared emergency. With that, it means it has not gone to any committee, has no public input, no hearings, no markups, and no time to fully consider the legislation. The bill has been brought to us under an onerous, blatantly political process, and its contents are troubling as well. And it seems to me that with every passing hour, a new alarming provision comes to light. Perhaps if the House majority had spent less time voting to undermine the health care law, take health care away from people, or investigating a non-existent scandal in Benghazi, we might have been able to do a budget. While this may have averted another dangerous government shutdown, what we're doing now, this bill is another example of the preferred method of governance, manufactured crises. We're pushed and pulled from the brink for the political games, and America suffers. At 1,603 pages, this spending bill is a behemoth. It was submitted in the dark of night at the last minute in hopes that we can find out what's in it, and serves as further proof that the majorities reneged on their pledge of transparency. Speaker Boehner said himself in December of 2010, as reported by the New York Times, and I quote, "I do not believe that having 2,000-page bills on the House floor serves anyone's best interest, not the House, not the members, and certainly not for the American people." End quote. He was referring, of course, to the fact that we would have 72 hours to examine such legislation. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the New York Times article from December 17, 2010, titled, quote, "Republicans prepare for looming budget battle, even then," end quote.
Without objection.
And thank you very much. Now, this bill can cause grievous harm to the Department of Homeland Security by funding it till only February of next year. And it really does endanger the nation's safety and security because they are the people who provide border security, TSA. I've said this in the past, but it bears repeating that funding the government in tranches weakens, destabilizes, and undermines our nation. The majority's insistence on punishing the president for his executive order on immigration by toying with the funding on the Department of Homeland Security, of all things, is troubling. This maneuver will hinder how we train new officers, how we guard the border, and endanger the nation's airports. But the most egregious provisions of this bill strike at the very soul of our democracy. A last-minute, non-germane addition would fundamentally change our republic. It gives away almost all the power of the people to choose the leaders and participate in their government by cementing the status of power donors. This provision changes campaign finance law to allow Megadonors to give 10 times the amount currently allowed to political parties for housekeeping. And we all know, those of us in the political field, know what it means to have the housekeeping accounts. That means it can go for absolutely anything. This change flies in the face of McCain-Feingold and completes the mission of the Supreme Court with their decision on Citizens United. This tenet has been central to our democracy, that each person has equal power to influence their government by their voice and their vote. Not only has this Congress refused to reenact the Voting Rights Act, this added provision will hasten the toxic influence of money and further corrupt and unbalance our democracy. Furthermore, the underlying bill includes a provision added only 2 days ago that would put our economy in danger and roll back the gains made since the Great Recession. This most egregious provision would change Dodd-Frank bill to give undue power back to the banks. The provision puts the taxpayers on the hook for risky behaviors by Wall Street banks, meaning once again, taxpayers will have to bail out the banks if they fail. It was a basic tenet of Dodd-Frank that we would never do that again. And that has now will be undone. It's been only 5 years since the start of the Great Recession, and economy's made great strides, adding 10.9 million private sector jobs in the last 57 months. But passing this bill would risk erasing those strides by steering us on a dangerous path toward another recession. The former chair of the House Financial Services Committee, Barney Frank, released a statement this week calling this inserted provision a, quote, substantive mistake, a terrible violation of the procedure that should be followed on this complex and important subject, and a frightening precedent that provides a roadmap for further attacks on our protection against financial instability. He continues, ironically, it was a similar unrelated rider put without debate into a larger bill that played a major role allowing the irresponsible, unregulated derivative transactions to contribute to the crisis. He's referring to the crisis of 2008. He is warning us. He's imploring us, don't make the same mistake twice. Our national economy cannot take this risk. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert this article from the Wall Street Journal from December 10, 2014, entitled, quote, Barney Frank criticized planned rollback of his namesake financial law, end quote, into the record. Thank you. For these reasons and several others, Democrats should not support this bill, and I urge my colleagues, Madam Speaker, to vote no against the rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves